I never thought the day I buried my grandpa Frank would also be the day I discovered who my real family was. At 28, working at a marketing company in Portland, Oregon, I thought I understood the people closest to me. Grandpa Frank had been my anchor since my parents divorced when I was 10, giving me a safe harbor in his 2-story house where I still kept my childhood room. But as I stood at his graveside that gray October morning, I had no idea that while I was saying goodbye to the one person who truly loved me unconditionally, the people I called family were already erasing every trace of my existence from the place I called home. Before I share what happened that broke my heart into pieces, let me know where you are watching from. Hit that like button if you have ever felt betrayed by family, and subscribe, because this story will show you how sometimes the people who hurt us the most end up teaching us the strongest lessons. Trust me, you will not believe what I found when I came home from the cemetery. Let me take you back to understand how everything unfolded. When my parents divorced, I was just 10 years old and my world completely shattered. My mom, Linda, remarried Gary when I turned 14, and he brought his own baggage into our lives, including his daughter, Brianna, who was 5 at the time. From day one, it was clear that Brianna was the golden child who could do no wrong, while I was treated more like an inconvenience than a family member. The saving grace in all of this chaos was my grandpa Frank. He was a skilled carpenter who had built his beautiful 2-story house with his own hands back in the 1970s. When my parents split, he opened his doors to me without question. My room was upstairs overlooking his carefully tended garden, where he grew tomatoes and sunflowers every summer. Grandpa had crafted every piece of furniture in that room specifically for me. There was a maple wood desk where I did my homework, a matching bookshelf that held all my favorite novels, and a hope chest he had carved with intricate flower designs for my 16th birthday. 3 years ago, when Grandpa started getting sick with emphysema from all those years of working with sawdust, Mom Linda and Gary moved into his house to help take care of him. I had already moved out by then, renting a small apartment closer to my job, but I still considered that upstairs room my sanctuary. It held every important memory of my childhood and teenage years. The morning of the funeral was absolutely brutal. October in Oregon can be unforgiving, and the rain was coming down in sheets as we gathered at Riverside Cemetery. I noticed immediately that Brianna was not there, which struck me as odd since she had been living in the same house as Grandpa for 3 years. When I asked Gary where she was, he just shrugged and said his daughter was too emotional to handle a funeral. Looking back now, I realized that was the first red flag I should have paid attention to. The ceremony was exactly what Grandpa would have wanted: simple, dignified, and filled with stories about his kindness and generosity. The pastor talked about how Frank had volunteered at the local food bank every Saturday for over 15 years, and how he had built wheelchair ramps for elderly neighbors who could not afford contractors. As they lowered his casket into the ground next to my grandmother, who had passed 10 years earlier, I felt like I was losing the last person in the world who truly understood me. During the drive back from the cemetery, something felt off about the whole situation. Mom Linda kept checking her phone every few minutes, typing quick messages, and avoiding eye contact with me. Gary suggested we stop somewhere for dinner, but I was emotionally drained and just wanted to go back to Grandpa's house to be alone with my memories. I told them I needed some time to process everything and would maybe join them later. What I really wanted was to spend some quiet time in my old room, surrounded by all the things that reminded me of happier times. I planned to collect a few special keepsakes that Grandpa had given me over the years, including a small wooden jewelry box he had made for my 18th birthday, and some old photo albums that chronicled our fishing trips to the coast. When I pulled into the driveway of the house that had been my refuge for so many years, I immediately noticed something was wrong. The front door was unlocked, which was unusual since Grandpa had always been careful about security. As I climbed the familiar creaking stairs to the second floor, I could hear a movement coming from behind my bedroom door. At first, I thought maybe Mom Linda had asked someone to help pack up Grandpa's belongings, so I knocked gently before turning the handle. Nothing in my life had prepared me for what I saw when I opened that door. Brianna, now 19, and apparently feeling very comfortable making decisions about my personal space, was hanging her clothes in my closet. My vintage band posters had been ripped down and replaced with pictures of Korean pop stars. The quilt my grandmother had sewn for me was crumpled in a corner, and Brianna's hot pink bedding was spread across the bed that Grandpa had built with his own hands. I stood there in complete shock, trying to process what was happening. When Brianna finally noticed me standing in the doorway, she did not even have the decency to look embarrassed. Instead, she rolled her eyes and said in the most casual tone imaginable that she needed a bigger space and Mom Linda had told her she could have this room. When I asked where all of my belongings were, she just shrugged and suggested I check the basement. My hands were shaking as I rushed down to the basement, hoping to find my things safely stored in boxes somewhere. But the basement was completely empty, except for Grandpa's old woodworking tools and some holiday decorations. A terrible feeling was growing in the pit of my stomach as I realized what might have happened. I ran outside to the backyard, and what I found there will haunt me for the rest of my life. There, soaking in the October rain next to the garbage bins, was everything that mattered to me from my childhood and teenage years. Photo albums from family vacations were waterlogged and falling apart. The teddy bear that Grandpa had given me for my 16th birthday had a huge tear in its side, with stuffing spilling out onto the wet ground. My high school diploma was crumpled up like a piece of trash, and my college degree was barely recognizable after being exposed to the elements. The wooden jewelry box that Grandpa had spent weeks carving for my 18th birthday was sitting in a puddle of muddy water, its delicate hinges already starting to rust. Inside, I found my grandmother's pearl earrings, the only thing I had left of her, now tarnished and probably ruined forever. Academic awards I had earned throughout school were scattered around like confetti, some of them torn in half. I fell to my knees in that muddy yard, holding pieces of my childhood that someone had literally thrown away like garbage. These were not just objects to me. They represented every milestone, every achievement, and every happy memory I had built in this house with the only family member who had ever truly cared about me. The betrayal was so deep and so complete that I could barely breathe. When I heard car doors slamming in the driveway, I knew Linda and Gary had returned. I gathered up what I could salvage and marched into the house, my clothes soaked and my face streaked with tears and mud. The confrontation that followed showed me exactly who these people really were underneath their masks of fake family unity. Linda's first reaction when she saw me was not concern or remorse, but irritation that I was dripping water on her clean kitchen floor. When I demanded to know how she could throw away my personal belongings while I was at my grandfather's funeral, she had the audacity to act like I was being unreasonable. She said it was just necessary cleaning, and that Brianna needed the space more than I did since she was actually living there full-time. Gary immediately jumped to his wife's defense, telling me I was being dramatic and that I should be grateful they had even kept the room available for as long as they had. According to him, I was a grown woman with my own apartment, so I had no right to expect a bedroom in someone else's house. The way he said it made it clear that he had never considered this my home, even though I had lived here longer than he had. But the worst part was when Linda revealed what she really thought about our relationship. She looked me straight in the eye and said that I was not even living there anymore, so Brianna had more right to that room than I did. She said Brianna was part of this family now, and it was time for me to accept that and move on with my life. The words hit me like a physical blow because I finally understood that in her mind, I had been replaced a long time ago. Just then, Brianna appeared in the kitchen doorway, completely unfazed by the emotional devastation happening in front of her. She actually had the nerve to tell me that she had wanted that room for years because it had a better view than hers. She said the morning sunlight was perfect for her makeup routine, And the larger closet space was exactly what she needed for her expanding wardrobe. There was no apology, no acknowledgement that my belongings had been destroyed, just cold calculation about what she wanted and how she had gotten it. That was the moment I realized this had not been a spontaneous decision made in the chaos after the funeral. This had been planned probably for weeks or even months. They had waited until the day I would be most vulnerable and emotionally destroyed to execute their plan to erase me from the family completely. While I was mourning the loss of the most important person in my life, they were celebrating their opportunity to finally get rid of me for good. As I stood there in that kitchen, surrounded by people who were supposed to love me, I remembered something important. Just 3 weeks earlier, when Grandpa was in the hospital for the last time, he had mentioned something about meeting with his lawyer, Thompson. He said there were important things he needed to tell me, but he wanted to wait until he was feeling stronger. Unfortunately, that conversation never happened because he passed away 2 days later. The memory of that unfinished conversation gave me a glimmer of hope in what felt like the darkest moment of my life. I decided I needed to call lawyer Thompson first thing in the morning to see if Grandpa had left any instructions or messages for me. Little did I know that this phone call would change everything and give me the power to turn the tables on the people who had betrayed me so completely. I barely slept that night, tossing and turning in my small apartment while images of my destroyed belongings played on repeat in my mind. As soon as the law office opened at 8 a.m., I was on the phone with Thompson and Associates. The receptionist put me through to Mr. Thompson immediately when I mentioned my grandfather's name, which told me he had been expecting my call. What Thompson told me during that 15-minute phone conversation was absolutely life-changing. My grandfather had indeed updated his will just 6 weeks before his death, and the timing was no coincidence. Thompson explained that Frank had become increasingly worried about how Linda and Gary were treating me, especially after he overheard several conversations where they talked about what they planned to do with his house after he died. The most shocking revelation was that Grandpa had witnessed Gary and Brianna making jokes about how they were going to redecorate my room once the old man was out of the picture. He had also seen Linda going through my personal belongings when she thought no one was watching, clearly planning what she wanted to keep and what she wanted to discard. These observations had prompted him to take legal action to protect me. According to the will, I was the sole inheritor of the house and all of its contents, including the land it sat on, and a savings account that I had not even known existed. The documents specified that Linda and Gary were allowed to remain in the house only as long as I permitted them to do so. They had no legal claim to the property whatsoever, and I had the absolute right to ask them to leave at any time for any reason. Thompson also explained that there was a letter Grandpa had written specifically for me, sealed and stored in his office safe. He said I could come pick it up anytime I was ready, but he wanted to make sure I understood my legal rights first. The house was mine, free and clear, with no mortgage or liens against it. I was now the legal owner of the property, where I had been treated like an unwanted guest. I spent the rest of that day walking around downtown Portland trying to process this incredible turn of events. Part of me felt guilty about the power I now held over Linda and Gary, but a larger part of me was angry enough to use that power exactly the way they had used their perceived authority over me. They had shown me no mercy when I was grieving and vulnerable, so why should I show them any mercy now? By evening, I had made my decision. I drove back to the house that was now legally mine, carrying a copy of the will and a new sense of confidence that I had never felt before in my dealings with these people. I found them all in the living room watching television, as if nothing had happened, as if they had not just destroyed 28 years of my personal history while I was burying the man who raised me. Brianna was sprawled across the couch in my old room's pajamas, which she had apparently claimed along with everything else. She had already repainted the walls from the soft blue color I had chosen to a bright pink that was visible from the hallway. The beautiful maple furniture, that Grandpa had crafted specifically for me had been shoved into corners to make room for Brianna's modern white dresser set that looked cheap and temporary compared to the timeless pieces he had created. I asked them all to join me in the living room because I had something important to discuss. Linda immediately started apologizing for how things had been handled, but her words felt hollow and calculated. She said they had only been trying to help me move forward with my life, and that keeping a childhood bedroom was not healthy for a woman my age. Gary nodded along, adding that they thought a clean break would be better for everyone involved. But their tune changed dramatically when I pulled out the copy of the will and began reading the relevant sections out loud. The silence that followed was absolutely deafening. Linda's face went completely white. Gary's mouth fell open, and Brianna sat up so quickly that she knocked over her drink. The power dynamic in that room shifted so suddenly that you could almost feel it in the air. Gary was the first to recover from the shock, and his reaction was exactly what I had expected from him. He immediately started talking about challenging the will in court, claiming that Frank had not been mentally competent when he signed it. He threatened to drag me through years of expensive legal battles that would eat up any inheritance I might receive. His voice got louder and more aggressive as he realized that his comfortable living situation was about to disappear. Linda tried a different approach, appealing to my emotions and our relationship as mother and daughter. She talked about how hard it would be for them to find another place to live on short notice, especially with Gary's recent back injury affecting his work schedule. She asked how I could possibly consider putting my own mother out on the street conveniently, forgetting how easily she had put my belongings out in the rain. But it was Brianna's reaction that really sealed my determination to follow through with my plan. Instead of showing any remorse for her role in destroying my possessions, she became absolutely furious that her comfortable new living arrangement was being threatened. She started screaming about how unfair it was that I got everything just because I was related to a grumpy old man who never liked her anyway. Her mask of sweet innocence fell away, completely revealing the entitled and selfish person she had always been underneath. I let them rant and plead and threaten for about 10 minutes before I delivered my ultimatum. They had exactly 2 hours to pack their belongings and leave my property, or I would call the police and have them removed for trespassing. I told them I would be going to get some dinner and expected the house to be empty when I returned. The look of disbelief on their faces was almost worth all the pain they had caused me. When I came back 3 hours later with Chinese takeout and a bottle of wine to celebrate my new independence, the house was completely empty, except for the furniture that had always belonged there. They had taken everything they could carry and loaded it into Gary's pickup truck and Linda's sedan. My old room was left exactly as Brianna had redecorated it, which was fine with me because I planned to restore it to its original condition anyway. The days following their departure were a whirlwind of emotions that I had not expected. The silence in the house felt both peaceful and overwhelming after years of walking on eggshells around people who clearly resented my existence. I spent hours just wandering from room to room, rediscovering spaces that had been off limits to me when Linda and Gary were in control. Linda tried calling me several times during that first week, usually late at night when I suspected she had been drinking. Her voicemails were a mixture of tearful apologies and angry accusations, sometimes within the same message. She talked about how she had sacrificed so much to take care of her father, conveniently forgetting that she had moved into his house primarily because her marriage to Gary had left them financially unstable. Gary showed up at the house exactly 8 days after I had asked them to leave. He stood on the front porch in his work clothes, looking older and more defeated than I had ever seen him. He asked if we could have a rational conversation about the situation, and despite my better judgment, I invited him inside. His approach was much more humble than it had been during our last confrontation. He apologized for how they had handled cleaning out my room, admitting that the timing had been insensitive and cruel. He explained that Brianna had been pestering Linda about getting the bigger bedroom for months, and they had thought it would be easier to just make the change while I was dealing with the funeral. He said they had not intended to hurt me so deeply, but his explanation felt like too little too late. Gary also revealed some financial information that helped me understand their desperation. Apparently, they had been counting on inheriting at least part of Grandpa's estate to pay off some significant credit card debts that Gary had accumulated during a period of unemployment. Without that financial safety net, they were facing the possibility of bankruptcy and had already moved into a cheap weekly motel on the outskirts of town. While part of me felt sorry for their situation, I could not forget how they had treated me during my most vulnerable moment. I told Gary that if they were serious about rebuilding our relationship, they could start by finding their own apartment and proving that they could treat me with basic respect and decency. I was not completely closing the door on the possibility of reconciliation, but it would have to be on very different terms than before. Brianna predictably took a completely different approach to the situation. Instead of any attempt at apology or reconciliation, she sent me a series of increasingly nasty text messages blaming me for destroying her family and making her mother cry every night. She said I was selfish and vindictive, and that Grandpa Frank would be ashamed of how I was treating the people who had taken care of him in his final years. Her messages revealed a level of entitlement and self-centeredness that was truly breathtaking. She seemed genuinely confused about why I was upset about my belongings being thrown away, suggesting that I should have been grateful they had cleaned out the clutter for me. She had no understanding that those items had emotional value that could not be replaced regardless of their monetary worth. But it was during the process of cleaning and restoring the house that I discovered something that changed my entire perspective on the situation. Hidden in the back of the desk drawer in what had been Grandpa's study, I found an envelope with my name written in his careful handwriting. Inside was a letter dated just 2 weeks before his death, explaining exactly why he had made the decisions he had made. The letter revealed that Grandpa had been watching the dynamics in his household much more carefully than any of us had realized. He wrote about overhearing conversations where Linda and Gary discussed their plans for his property and how they talked about me like I was a burden they were eager to get rid of. He had seen Brianna going through my belongings when she thought no one was looking, clearly planning what she wanted to claim for herself. Most importantly, Grandpa wrote about how much it had meant to him to watch me grow up in his house, surrounded by the furniture he had made, and the love he had tried to build into every corner of our shared space. He said that I was the only person who had ever truly appreciated the craftsmanship and care that had gone into creating our home, and he wanted to make sure it remained a place where I felt valued and protected. The letter ended with words that brought tears to my eyes and finally gave me the peace I had been searching for since his death. He wrote, "You are always the light of this old house, Melanie, and I want you to know that you deserve to be surrounded by people who see that light and cherish it. Never settle for less than that, no matter who tries to convince you that you are asking for too much." Reading those words, I finally understood that standing up for myself was not about being cruel or vindictive. It was about honoring the love and respect that Grandpa had tried to teach me I deserved. He had given me not just a house, but a foundation for building a life where I would never again accept being treated as less than worthy of love and consideration. The months that followed were a period of healing and rediscovery that I had not expected. I slowly restored my old bedroom to its original condition, repairing the furniture that Grandpa had made and repainting the walls, the soft blue color that had always made me feel calm and safe. I even managed to restore some of the water-damaged photographs, preserving the visual record of happier times. Linda eventually moved into a small apartment with Gary about 20 minutes away from my house. Our relationship remains complicated, but we have started having occasional coffee meetings where we try to work through the damage that was done. She has admitted that her loyalty to Gary and Brianna had led her to make choices that she now regrets, though I'm not sure she fully understands the depth of the betrayal I felt. Gary has found steady work again and seems to be making an effort to control his temper and his financial impulses. He sends me a card every year on Grandpa's birthday, which I appreciate, even though we will never have a close relationship. Brianna, on the other hand, has never acknowledged any wrongdoing and continues to blame me for the consequences of her own actions. Sometimes the greatest gift someone can give you is not just their love, but the strength to know when you deserve better. And sometimes the family that matters most is the one that sees your worth when others choose to ignore it. Grandpa Frank taught me that love should never come with conditions that require you to accept disrespect or cruelty, and that lesson has shaped every relationship I have built since then. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who tried to take advantage of your kindness? Let me know in the comments below, because I would love to hear your stories of finding the courage to demand the respect you deserve. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button to support my channel and make sure to subscribe so you never miss my latest videos about real-life situations and the lessons they teach us. Share this with anyone who might need to hear that they deserve better treatment from the people who claim to love them. Thank you so much for listening to my story and for being part of this amazing community where we support each other through life's most difficult challenges. I wish you all the strength to recognize your own worth and the courage to protect it no matter what obstacles you might face. Until next time, remember that you deserve to be surrounded by people who celebrate your light instead of trying to dim it.